Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining me today. We'll be working on Pigeon Pose. That'll be our highlighted pose, and we'll have a chance to break that down a little bit, go through a 4 sequence, create a class that includes pigeon. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Some of the benefits of pigeon and the anatomy of pigeon and how we could create just a simple 5-minute sequence that would be helpful for most audiences to open up those hips and reduce some of that lower back pain that tight hips and tight hamstrings and other tight things tend to tug and pull. And so that'll be the highlight of what we're going to be doing today. So opening up the hips and pigeon. So if you were to go to Google and type in pigeon yoga, you'd probably get hundreds of thousands of different results, and if not more. And the reason is pigeon can be expressed in so many different ways depending on where the practitioner brings it. And so there isn't so much a right or wrong in pigeon as much. On the screen here, I'm sharing pigeon with Kit. She's got her forehead met to the earth, which is quite lovely. One option for this is you could even bring a block to bring the floor to you. So, looking at a block as an assistant, a little yoga assistant, a little hands-on assistant for you can go such a long way and be so, so, so helpful. So a block for the forehead just to rest on can also help us take off some of the pressure that might be found on the knee or even through the glutes or even through the front of the hip flexors and the front of the leg there by trying to bring the head down further and opening up maybe further than our body actually really wants to go. So I like blocks for this. This is a really nice one. Another prop you'll commonly see me use in pigeon is a bolster. So I think if I only got one prop in life, if I stood in line for the yoga gods and I only got one prop and that's it, I only get one, I don't get any more, it wouldn't be a block, it would be a bolster. And that I can do so much with a bolster and it's just so incredibly yummy. And for the most part, a block is really helpful in bringing things to the next level. But I think a bolster helps you fall into the bosom of the earth a little bit, which is super nice and I enjoy. So, just depending on what you're particularly interested in and what brings joy to your heart. And so, that's really where it's at. So if you seek out a pigeon that is moving a little closer towards king pigeon, and let me just give a little share on that for our book here, our trusted reading. There's a lot out there, a lot of different things out there. I like the Yoga Anatomy book. I prefer the first edition over the second. I have a few reasons for that, but some folks prefer the second edition, and that's also okay. But so here, as we explore this book, this would be described as a king pigeon. And so the key thing that's much different than what we were doing a moment ago is the reach for the foot. So going back to standing in line for the prop gods and what are we going to choose? For this one, I would probably choose a strap, or absent owning a strap, a robe tie works nicely provided it's hardy and strong and not small and thin. It might bring pressure to the skin. So something nice and wide is helpful is a strap, certainly something sturdy. The strap can be used here, and that can do a nice job of firing up all of these same muscles that you see here on this picture, right? Without actually reaching for the toe. So maybe you're working in the direction of reaching for the toe and maybe you're not. And maybe your practice is already there. So in either case, though, it greatly impacts the muscles that are used and the muscles that fire up based on the choice of the modification that you're going to go with. So if we go back to the last picture, I'll give that a moment to load. If we were to look at the anatomy of this posture, we wouldn't see anywhere near the amount of stretch or muscular firing in the front of the body, through the abs and chest and such, as we see when we bring it into king pigeon. And so essentially all we're really doing to go from here to there is bringing the body upright and bending the knee and reaching for the foot, either with your hands or a strap, right? So not actually as far off as one might think if you were to look at the two different pictures side by side, but there's other variations too. And let's see if we can kind of explore the sweet spot between the different ideas. And so I'm headed over to the manual. So if you're enrolled in the yoga teacher training, then join me there for the manual. Let's pull this up for you. All right, so the best way to find pigeon, or I believe as I've listed it in this is half pigeon, is to go to the table of contents. So if I head on over to page 54, I am going to reach half pigeon. Do, 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 do. All right, so here we see it again, just in another light. We do have the Sanskrit included. That's not necessarily as much what I personally bring emphasis to here, because the time I would spend teaching you another language, I'm actually teaching you the language of anatomy. And so, sometimes we have to pick and choose what we're going to choose and teach. And so the same applies if you're taking this lesson because you're a yoga teacher or continuing education, or because you want to become a yoga teacher. You want to speak to the audience in front of you based on what sets your soul on fire. So, a big word I'm hearing thrown around right now is passion project. And so if what you do for a living is also your passion project, then bonus, right? Then it doesn't even feel like work. Whereas if you're not passionate about what you're teaching, that might show up in your lessons. So that being said, let's get into the anatomy and this little middle space that we see here in half pigeon. So the last picture, we had Kit face down. In this one, she's upright, but she does not reach for the foot. So I want you to take 2 minutes. I'll set a little alarm here on my phone. I want you to take 2 minutes and I want you to jot down in layman's terms what key differences you see between those three variations. And you can, if you know anatomy and you love anatomy and you want to open up your anatomy book, you can go that route. If you just want to go with, reach for the foot versus not, bend the knee versus not, that kind of thing. Whatever works for you. We'll do this for 2 minutes and then we'll talk about it. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully, those 2 minutes were of service to you, where we have a chance to just put pen to paper and absorb some of the ideas that we've been sharing. So, in this particular posture here, this half pigeon, some of the things, the key things that we see is we find a lengthening of the hip flexors. The hip flexors are located in front of the hips. Commonly, as we sit in a chair, they are shortened, and so we want to do postures such as this to lengthen them. Fun fact, make sure your body's warmed up a little bit before you spring into this one to help reduce the chance of injury. So this is nice in that it prepares the body for postures such as back bends, lotus pose, things like that. So as we move into these, let's say, bigger postures, so we'll call them today, these bigger postures, it's nice to track your way towards these bigger postures and get a little bit more of a handle on the spinal movement and warm up the muscles and connective tissue and the skeletal system before it goes to a larger degree of movement from baseline. So this is a really nice go-to if in your class or your personal practice, you're moving towards that back bend or lotus pose. So keep things like this in mind. So let's see, oftentimes we see stress held within the hips. It's just so common and a yummy stretch, with benefits all around. So like I said, I have many, many postures that I can choose from to integrate in my practice. And at the end of the day, I think a pigeon would win it. If I only got one, I think it would be a pigeon and a bolster, if that's what I got to work with. So why don't you just take one moment, if you haven't already, and just read through the cues and the qualities and the modifications that you see there, and just take a few notes on it. And I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. About a half a minute left. All right. So hopefully you had a chance to just read through some of those cues and qualities and modifications. And let's just move towards it now. So in this one, we talk a little bit about how to get into the pigeon, which you don't necessarily see in every one of the asanas. But I think that coming in from a three-legged down dog is just so incredibly delightful. I wanted to include that for you. So it's one of my favorite goes-tos. It's a really nice way to get your students or your personal practice from, say, a standing to a downward facing dog into a three-legged down dog, and then send that leg forward. Maybe you're moving to lunge series, or maybe you're dropping it down coming into this half pigeon. And so, that could be the creative class that you choose today. or it could be something else. But I like just to give an entryway into this one because it can be so awkward to verbally walk a practitioner into this particular posture because there's so much going on. So just something to keep in mind there. So commonly we hear with this posture to bring the shin parallel to the top of the mat, or the knee, we'll hear different ways to say it, but at the parallel at the top of the mat. And I actually kind of want to point out a cautionary tale on that, in that many folks will do whatever it takes to have that happen. And they might not realize that they're possibly torquing their knee or potential injury could happen there. And it just doesn't work for everybody. Some folks have really tight hips. And so if the hips are tight, and that's why we're doing the half pigeon, and if we haven't warmed up, which hopefully we did, but if that didn't happen, and then we try to bring our shin parallel to the top of the mat, the purpose of that cue is to help protect the knee. But in reality, I think it's often misunderstood and can cause more harm than good. So we want to look at our cues and make sure that the benefits outweigh the risks. And so if what we're trying to do is protect the knee, if we come in from a three-legged down dog and we invite that leg to come forward, often I won't even cue where to put the foot. I'll allow the practitioner to work their way into where to put the foot. And then once there, at the quality stage, kind of get into the refinement of how to go about doing it. Let them know that this option exists. But it's not that we're all trying to get the shin parallel with the top of the mat. So I dispel the myth. So that's how I feel about that particular one. And if that does feel so good to you and you absolutely love that one, great. I mean, fantastic. Then that just means that your body is in alignment with that version of this posture. So that's just something that we want to kind of keep in mind a little bit. One thing that we talk about is bringing the spine into extension. So technically extension is like upright, like a mountain, and hyperextension is like a back bend. But again, language can be diluted a little bit, and what people talk about in circles can sometimes be a little light version of. So we have flexion, forward fold, extension, back bend in this case. So bring the spine into extension as you softly drop your shoulders back and down. And so drop your shoulders back and down does not necessarily mean that we're squeezing a pencil in between our shoulders or that we're tightening up our shoulders in order to open up our chest more. It means that if you have like one of those little Halloween skeletons, which I actually picked up at Walgreens at Halloween time and I have for yoga teacher training, his name is Les. If you just picked him up from the string that's attached to his head and you let him dangle, that's truly what we're trying to get to in mountainous humans. So when we talk about shoulders back and down, if you imagine the skeleton, the arms just kind of fall alongside. Everything's in neutral. Everything's, in moving towards the center of the body. And so we're not trying to send our shoulders back. It's just that in most cases, folks have their shoulders forward and we're trying to bring them back, AKA in alignment with their earlobes. So I hope that brings a little clarification for that. Just when we hear that being said, we don't really want to pinch a pencil in between our shoulders. And, over the years, instructors have tried to get crafty and creative in how to share the ideas and, have the flowery language or maybe this symbolic language that students really respond to in a yoga class. And that's a really great thing. But also sometimes there's a time to revisit or challenge a cue that is commonly shared with folks. And I myself have one. Like I used to say, shoulders are square above the hips. And, then I took the principles course with Leslie Kaminoff, and there's a long course, and he really broke down why there might be better cues in that one. And so that didn't mean that everything I ever taught before that day was wrong. It just meant that my learning processes, my studentship has begun to evolve. So I invite you to take that mind space when approaching ideas like this. So from there, fingertips are light. So why would I add that one when we have so much going on? How did fingertips are light make the cut out of so many? Definitely try to condense it down to a short list for everybody. And essentially, the result of fingertips are light is because the core is engaged. So if our core is not engaged, chances are we're not setting on light fingertips. It's more likely that we're kind of jamming into the palm of our hand, which might bring stress to the wrist, or maybe even dumping our body weight onto the hip, which might further stress out that knee, and then the chain reaction that goes on from there, the imbalance between left and right side of the body. So at the point, it's kind of like a top. When you spin a top, it needs to be somewhat balanced to stay upright. Well, yogis are the same way. So if you get that going and the fingertips are nice and light, I think you'll find that that's a byproduct of the core engaged. And then you don't have to keep saying the words engage the core, right? Which is really super helpful. So the next one, I usually jump right down to modification, and then I go into qualities and refinement of the movement in a class setting. If and when I ever rewrite this manual for the 900th time, Part B, Section CA4, I'll probably flip these two. But the idea is the cue is what to do, the quality is how to do it, and the modification is what else can you do, right? And so that's really all this is. And the goal is to expand the learning here, to expand the knowledge and so on, but not until you have a nice strong base established first. So in this case, the modification that I chose is this pose can be done supine as a single leg stretch. So if we flip her over onto her back, she goes from prone face down to supine face up. And we'll talk about some challenges a little later out on that idea as far as delivering a class in a classroom setting. But if you are looking for this stretch in your personal practice, and today's webinar is 5 minutes to open up the hips practice, then I would say a handful of postures, not a whole sequence, but a handful of postures and held for a period of time, maybe with some yummy props like pillows or rolled up blankets or towels, little washcloth rolled up underneath the neck, that kind of thing. Really take the time to set the stage for your posture. And then once there, hang out there for a while. And so think about like making your personal practice, even if it's only 5 minutes, setting up for it as though you're walking into a spa day. They don't skip anything. There's cucumbers on the ice. There's the whole thing. All the niceties are there. Typically we would see, like a little rolled up pillow under our neck or washcloth or towel or blanket or whatever it is you have. Commonly we'll see, a little half bolster slipped under the knees there. That takes off some of the pressure in the low back, which is really nice. Another reason why my bolster is one of my go-tos and I love so much, because I move my bolster from maybe the top of the mat where previously I rested my forearms in this half pigeon, for example, to underneath my knees there for my Shavasana, and it's just really nice. So, finding things that are comfortable to you and that work for you. So that story I just told you, that version I just told you, is one thing that you can do to help set up for pigeon. But I would not take this modification if you're teaching a vinyasa flow. So if you're teaching a vinyasa flow, there just simply isn't enough time to start flipping and flopping, whether it be yourself or your students, going from prone face down to supine face up and back again. And then if from here we were moving back towards the downward facing dog, and then maybe even revisiting that 3-legged down dog, and then if feeling frisky, fall back into wild thing. Who doesn't love that? That's probably my favorite sequence ever. And then come back through the other side and then back the way you came again. That's a good amount of sequencing there, just a handful of postures. So the thing is, if you're going to be threading postures together and you're not going to be staying there for a good long time, then for the modification in this one, if I'm moving in a vinyasa flow, which isn't necessarily a fast class, let it be known. It's just that we're moving with the breath. And if we're inhaling and exhaling through our movement, whatever that means to you, the breath is only going to be retained so long. So it's certainly not enough time to start flipping onto our back. So just know that. And one of the reasons I still put it in this manual is because it is a good one for folks that have anything happening with their knees, which is probably not the best idea to fall into this half pigeon and any kind of variation. And even if we have a little block or blanket wedged under the hips, sometimes that can be more awkward and fumbly than anything. And really coming onto the back is the best choice. However, that only applies if you're going to be there for a while. So that's kind of a little bit about the styles of yoga, and I have a little video that we're going to watch today that's 7 minutes and talks about that, and then we'll get a bit more into that and things along those lines. So with that being said, jumping up to the qualities. So the qualities is how you want them to do it. So oftentimes when I have newer instructors, they kind of go right in for how they want somebody to do something without telling them what it is they want them to do. So the first thing we want to do is name the posture, either to yourself or your personal practice or to your class, either way. You want to give them some cues to basically get them in the position that you want them to get into. You want to give them some alternatives, what else they can do, some modifications, and then we're going to start to thread in some of those qualities and how we want to go about doing it, which really serves on so many levels, because one thing that happens when you do that is if we are in this posture for a good long while, which it's really best served in for a good long while, it's helpful to entertain and educate your practitioner while you do so. It's also a really nice way to motivate, and to move the line, to move that yogic edge on not pain, but, we're making gains here. We're moving towards something bigger. So for our qualities here, to protect the knee, press the back side hip onto the mat. That works for some people, and that's what we're demonstrating here on the picture, where it just kind of, just torques over a little bit. It does definitely impact the anatomy of this posture. That does in fact happen, but any modification or quality you choose will do so. So you just need to choose what's right for you. All right, the back leg is engaged though. So commonly I'll see in class that back leg's just doing kind of whatever, maybe not even in alignment, sometimes not even on the mat, maybe off to the side some. And all the attention is going on what's happening at the pelvis, the knee, and the upper body, of course. And so I invite you to put as much awareness into that back leg as you will the rest of the body. So then what? Back leg right up to the neck. The neck is soft. So if we choose our qualities, if we balance our qualities in polar sides of the body and then keep revisiting them, then they're less likely to get forgotten about if you're just moving, like, say, from feet up to the crown of the head, and by then they've forgotten about the engagement of the back leg. So that's kind of my approach, but you find your own sweet way of doing it. I find that that's really effective though. So let's see. I also mentioned that the foot can be near the groin rather than parallel to the mat. And remember, I said at the onset of this one, I don't even necessarily cue it right away. So it's not in cues, and it's not in modifications. It could be in modifications, but really what I wanted to do was express how else could you do this, if not this way that maybe you heard in a yoga class that did or didn't work for you, for folks that it might or might not work for. So I hope that that is helpful. So we're going to go ahead and flip over to this picture here. We're going to take a 2-minute break so that you can open up your yoga anatomy book to Pigeon. I do believe, well, at least on my version, it's page 126, but it's best to go to the table of contents to take a peek at that. And I will meet you there in 2 minutes. So let's break this down together. Got about a half a minute left. All right. So let's talk about this one. Depending on what version of the Yoga Anatomy book you have, it might look a little different. And maybe you get both of them, maybe you have one or the other. I will tell you I have both. Well, actually I have three because I also have the digital copy, which is really nice. The colors are so vibrant. It's easy to search and find. But ultimately I will admit that I prefer the first version over the second, in that it's just a little tighter. There's typically 2 pages of information per posture. And I find most folks get what they need from that. In the second edition, we start to have much more of a granular learning style, a much more breakdown of the why behind the what, and kind of like our cues and our qualities. We can get a little lost in the detail. And sometimes a result of that is to miss the entire point. So understanding the biological occurrences within the body is important, but ultimately all I really want you to know is what fires red on the body when in this posture. So we'll talk about the version that I have on the screen here, and then we'll talk about the version on the cover of Yoga Anatomy, and to be found on page 128 or 126 for me. And we'll see which page that is for you. So let's explore it a little further. When we look at this posture, honestly, so much is happening there. So much is happening, and let me just make sure you guys can nice view. And it really depends. So one thing we talked about is some modifications we could do. And we mentioned maybe a strap instead of reaching for the toe. So the impact of that would be is see how they're on under the arms there where the triceps are, they're fired red. That might be impacted, might not, but might be impacted from that. Depending on how far back we're reaching, and if that reaching is less so in the lower leg complex, then we might see a little bit less engagement in the leg or lower leg complex, and we might see a little more engagement in up through the chest, the thoracic spine, and so on. Any which way about it in this posture, if you're reaching in the direction of that foot, we're probably going to see a firing of the front of the body as well, in the glutes and the core in general, which is what helps keep our body up. And specifically, the one I do talk about so much are those hip flexors, seeing that back leg, seeing that extension of that back leg, seeing all that fired up. That does not change greatly between this version and the version where we're coming down to the ground. And so when we're coming down to the ground forward this way, I think that we still see the engagement in the front of the hips there. And there's just the softening of the rest of the body to just maybe just be. And I feel like that's really powerful. I think that can do so much for the practitioner. I think it can do so much in line with how long can we hang out here. What are some things that we could do that would impact the anatomy of this? Some key things we talked about was bring a block underneath the forehead. We talked about bring a bolster underneath the forearms. We talked about maybe tucking a blanket or a pillow underneath the front leg, rather, or even the back leg, or both, right? Creating a cushy surface for all of that. And that's where those yoga blankets are just really, really nice. I ordered, I don't even know how many, and you really you really get a good value. Those things last forever. They get softer each time you wash them, which is nice. So spend a few extra dollars on your blanket there, and they won't get the little fuzzy pulley things all over them, which is helpful. So just some key things that you can do there, and then other things exist too. I have something called the 1 minute egg, which is just amazing. It's like a yoga block, but it's shaped like an egg. And so since our bodies aren't really square and angular, this block works really nice. I'll often use that to tuck in various places for myself getting into this posture. So just some key things. Understanding the anatomy behind the posture will really, really benefit you in so many different ways. If you choose to reach for the toe, and there's so much to be said for that, and that if we are really looking for, finding that back bend in the space, which is also seen, say, like in a dancer's pose. So the only real difference between this and, say, dancer's pose is that in this case, we're on the floor, and in dancer's pose, we're standing up, which comes with its own challenges and likeliness of imbalances showing up as a result of that. But if you are reaching for the foot, then you're going to see far more engagement in the muscles that run up and down alongside the spine, the back of the body. Those are rector spinae on either side of the spine that hold us upright all day long, that work so hard. You're going to see more work there. You're going to see more of a lengthening there. Kamenov doesn't like the word stretch, so lengthening is a better word, I think, in conveying an idea. We can talk about that on another day at a different lesson, but glutes are still engaged, and, we still have some workload. We have a shortening of the hamstrings, not a lengthening of the hamstrings in the back of the thighs, shortening. And so when we go to lift something heavy and we see like our muscles bulge, that's because they're shortening, they're not lengthening. So there's different types of muscular movement. And we'll get into that and the science behind that, on another different day. But, here just kind of what goes on and what happens when muscles fiber, and how we go about building that muscular tissue and building those fibers and so on. And so those are some things that can happen. One interesting point I'd love to just kind of point out that a friend brought to my attention not long ago is, if you come back to the yoga anatomy book, I just want you to take a look. I want you to observe where that shin is on this. It's not parallel with the mat. It's actually a little closer to the groin in this posture. So I'll just set that down and let it be where it is. Let that be where it is. So let's switch over now. Let's bring our attention to putting together a few postures that equate to some of the things that we have seen in other yoga classes. If you were present for yesterday's lesson, then maybe you'll want to pull something from Kara's class, which was also posted today. So it was nice and handy and fresh and available for you. You can do that. So we'll go to this pigeon sails. So I just go ahead and pull it up here for you on our manual. And so we're going to find pigeon sails in the yoga snippets. And yoga snippets is just simply sequencing I've put together so that you can focus on learning the art of teaching, or, maybe even consider what your own personal practice looks like and how you could build a 5-minute sequence on your own that was balanced and well-rounded and had all the components of the class. If 5 minutes is what you have to give or offer, then great. Let it be a really effective 5 minutes on that one. So you can go ahead and open up in your manual to pigeon sails. If you're not sure where to find that, just head on over to the table of contents. It'll be right there. If you're watching from the screen, I'm sharing it here for you. So, okay, so we have the different things, a couple things that we talked about already and that we saw, and here they are now yet again, is we have this half pigeon. And in the world of yoga, I don't know that half pigeon is, going to be something you can Google. For the purpose of our training, it's what is the body doing it, and where can we make an adjustment for that verbally rather than a hands-on adjustment. So here we start off with this half pigeon and we invite it down into a pigeon. Maybe there's a block waiting. So here's a fun one. I keep the blocks at the top of the mat so that they're handy, so it's easy to reach for the block, right? Everybody gets their blocks on the way in and have them placed at the top of the mat so that they're available for use. Otherwise, it's like, oh, I don't even know where my block is. I'd have to get out of my posture in order to go get the block. And, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But ideally, just get the blocks at the top of the mat so that's where they are. And then, again, a sister pose to pigeon anyway is child's pose. So when we talked about flipping over onto our back and taking a single leg stretch, that's supine face up, I think the better bet is take child's pose and we'll meet you in downward dog here in a moment. That's probably the one that I would be more apt to use. For folks, here's an add-on for those of you that are looking to move the bar a little bit more. I would invite them to take frog if that's in their practice, but I would leave it at that, not going into frog because it would confuse the majority of the students that are in the room. But folks that have frog in their practice, perhaps they take frog, even beyond their pigeon. So that's one idea, one thing that can be done. But in this case, for our lesson today, for our creative class, 3 of the 4 postures that we're going to use is half pigeon, pigeon, child's pose, and something else. Dealer's choice, you get to pick. And you get to pick where you want that posture to be. Could be anything, it could be coming from the 3-legged down dog into a half pigeon, into a pigeon, into a child pose. So if you're not sure what to do that, right? Or it could be a half pigeon into a pigeon, into a child's pose, into a downward facing dog. Think about what would feel good for you. And the best way to explore this is to take your mat and play around with a little bit and see what comes up for you and what that looks like. So here's some cues. We want to sail the knee through the hands. This is like a word bank. I want you to consider these words I've given you a word bank that you'll build on as time goes by. And we actually do have a word bank in the course that I'll share with you so that you make sure you have that. Another cue, back leg lengthens. Another cue, shoulders over hips, round the front, right? So she rounds the front, she comes down into that pigeon, right? Shoulders are over hips, round front, press back into child's pose. So very clear, concise cues. You can add your flower language in there. Just make sure that the cue isn't lost while you do it. You don't want to sit on the knee. So sometimes we load our weight on sitting on the knee. So that's something you probably want to bring up early. And also qualities only for persons without knee issues. And while this isn't typically seen as a quality like on the Yoga Asana handbook version that I gave you a moment ago, it's just really important to highlight this and know this. If someone had knee surgery a year ago or however long ago, we probably want to figure something else out. And maybe that frog is in fact the answer for them. And here we have a soft back extension. So we're not going for the biggest back bend that we can get headed towards King Pigeon, but we're finding a softness in there. So using descriptive words around the posture that are invitation-based can go such a long way. And so we'll go ahead and take 2 minutes and just let you write some notes in your manual, or, I have a Mac, so I pull up preview and I just annotate notes right on my PDF here. If you have an Android, maybe you or a laptop of some other sort, some sort of program that you use. Whatever your process is, it doesn't matter to me. It can be a pen and paper, it can be a Leo spiral if you like. But just take 2 minutes and just jot down some notes on what you're thinking here, and then we'll move into the next phase. Okay, welcome back. I hope that was helpful to you. So we're going to go ahead and head over to our create a class and get a class going here. And depending on how many of these you filled out, there's several of them to work for. I'll move over to page 124 because I know that that one's open. So first thing about the create a class, for today, up at the top right-hand corner next to create a class, I'd like for you to write the word prone. So we want to organize these creative classes, not to view them as a 60 minutes experience because they're not, but rather segments of what the body's doing. And so the categories are standing, kneeling, seated, prone, face down, supine, face up, right? And then that way they become interchangeable and easy to grab and use and switch out. And then you're not always going back to the well to design a class from scratch, but rather repurposing work that you've already worked on. And I think that's a great approach in that it's through repetition that we gain mastery, and that's what we're after here. So in this one, it's your turn to teach, create a yoga segment. Be sure to include different movements of the spine, and they are neutral, such as a mountain, flexion, such as a forward fold, extension, technically hyperextension, which is a back bend, a lateral bend, which is side bend, rotation, which is a twist, inversion, where the head is below the heart. So some postures cover these categories more than once, although in most cases you're going to need a minimum of 2, probably 3 created class pages to meet that list, especially because we want to make sure that the twists and the back bends are done when the body's warm. And we've already kind of gotten things going. So starting your class off, say in the side bend, that's really nice. Maybe a forward fold, that's really nice. Save the twists and, the bigger spinal movements that the spine doesn't see day in, day out as much, save those for the back half of your class. So we'll break out into groups and teach one another 3 to 4 posture sequences. So that'll be done, in one of our labs, perhaps next week, not today. So you'll name your class. I often recommend you name your class after you're done with your class, or maybe just name it something in pencil to be a North Star for you, and then come back and name it something catchy or name it something that reflects what happened in your class. Either way, you want the name of your class to make sense with the postures that you chose. So for us, just to make life easy, under posture number 1, I would choose half pigeon. And so if you just did that, half pigeon there. Do a bunch of these and get them all lined up. Well, posture number 1 is half pigeon. And then posture number 2, we'll go back to our snippet utilizing the resource that we have here. Just open up here for you in your screen share. Go to your manual for your yoga snippet. So we are on page, hold on here. Get to that. And the way I do it is I go to the table of contents for page 2. Then I look it up. It was pigeon sales, so that's page 29. And all right, so half pigeon, pigeon, child's pose. And that's what I'm going to go with here, just to make life simple. Child's pose. And then here I'm going posture number 4 will be downward facing dog. All right, so that's it. And I guess the other thing that we would add up here that we mentioned in the upper right-hand corner would be prone. And this will go such a long way when it comes time for you to organize these and figure out how you're going to go about breaking these down. And so you'll want to add the cues, the qualities, and modification based on the manual and the resources that I have given you. Another great place after you get this far is to head up Yoga Journal. They're very heavy on the alignment and the props because yoga, Iyengar yoga students created Yoga Journal. And since then, I would say, you know, every lineage is probably expressed there, but it just does a really nice job of giving you some ideas. But I would do that after you really kind of have a handle on the manual first. Otherwise, you might find a whole lot of time passing and you have no fruit. So I'm going to name this class Opening the Hips. And so we'll get that done, and then how we go about it. The other thing I'd like to add to this is if you had gone back over to the Yoga Asana handbook, you would have seen, let me just get there, some little highlights and fun things underneath the picture. And I had mentioned in our lesson that these can be educational and helpful for folks that are in class. Can go a long way in motivating students to, you know, get to class, maybe off the sofa and get to class, because they're the reminder of how good the body feels, and they tend to be the things that they just take away with, you know. So in this case, I'm just going to copy that right from the manual, let that work be done for me, and annotate that, add some text. And I'm just going to drop this down at the bottom. And like you said, if technology isn't your thing and you're doing this with pen and paper, that's totally fine too. Any which way about it, though, I think it's nice to have it there and as a reference guide, so that way, when you come back to do this sequence, you can see different ways that it can be done and different reasons that we would do it. And I hope that kind of serves you a little bit in understanding the key muscles that are used, some of the things that we can find that benefit us as we choose these postures, a deeper understanding on why we choose these postures, and so on. The last thing I'm going to share for you, and then I'll just drop the link here in the chat for you, is our yoga styles lesson. And so I will go ahead and grab that link for you. Ooh, no. Share. Let me grab that link for you and reshare. And drop that one in the chat. And so for those of you that are enrolled in this course, you're able to access a half pigeon here.
To explore Pigeon Pose.
That are enrolled in this
so
course.
There are a couple